This week when we decided that we were going to switch everything around a bit, I thought back. I've done this, I think 2 or 3 times as a pastor where I have preached first. And it's kind of funny to see the looks on people's faces when they come in a couple minutes late. And they always check their watches or look at the clock and, how late am I really? But we felt it was a good opportunity to do this. We're going to be continuing this morning in the book of Esther. We've been digging into it to really look at God's woman and God's timing. To really look at the sovereignty of God in action. James Packer writes in his book, Your Father Loves You, he writes this: grace is God drawing sinners closer and closer to Him. How does God in grace prosecute this purpose? Not by shielding us from assault by the work, the flesh, and the devil, nor by protecting us from some burdensome and frustrating circumstance, not yet by shielding us from troubles created by our own temperament and psychology, but rather by exposing us to all these things, so as to overwhelm us with a sense of our own inadequacy, and to drive us to cling to Him more closely. This is the ultimate reason from our standpoint why God fills our lives with troubles and perplexities of one sort and another. It is to ensure that we shall learn to hold Him fast. The reason why the Bible spends so much time of its time reiterating that God is a strong rock, a firm defense, and a sure refuge and help for the weak is that God spends so much of His time showing us that we are weak, both mentally and morally, and dare not trust ourselves to find or follow the right road. When we walk along a clear road feeling fine and someone takes our arm to help us, likely we would impatiently shake him off. But when we are caught in rough country, in the dark, with a storm brewing and our strength spent, and someone takes our arm to help us, we would thankfully lean on Him. And God wants us to feel that our way through life is rough and perplexing, so that we may learn to lean on Him thankfully. Therefore, He takes steps to drive us out of self-confidence, to trust in Himself, to end the classic scriptural phrase for the secret of the godly man's life: wait on the Lord. This morning, as we begin to look at the book of Esther, continue to look at the book of Esther, we are going to see that a storm is coming to the Jewish people. That trials have come, and now Esther faces some very difficult decisions. And she faces a tough time where her life is on the line in several different ways. And yet God has been orchestrating this entire thing in order that His sovereignty may be shown and His name be glorified. And so, like Esther, there are times in all of our lives where we are going to face difficulties. Every one of us, even the youngest of us, have faced times in our life that are hard, and none of us like them. None of us enjoy those areas, but it's in those areas of life that we begin to understand that we have a God who is in control. A God who cares for us even in the midst of all of those things that are happening. So let's begin this morning. Last week, just a quick recap, we saw that Haman, that man of hate, that hate led to, he was an angry man that led to hate, that led to basically this idea of destroying the Jews, and that it tricked the king into signing this law, and now we're going to see the Jewish response to this. So let's read verses 1 through 3 of Esther chapter 4. I'm going to do something a little different today since we're not singing. I'm going to have you stand while I read. So if you please stand as we read verses 1 to 3 this morning. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. When he went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate, clothed in sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and his decree reached, there was a great mourning among the Jewish with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. This was a time of great distress in the Persian kingdom. All of this had probably shocked the people again. We have seen that the Jewish people up to this point were very good citizens. They had served the king in Babylon. It started with Daniel and his friends, and Daniel continued in Persia, and we have people like Nehemiah, who was cupbearer to the king, and they've been good citizens. But now this entire race of people was at risk of being destroyed. It was 11 months from the time that the law was signed to the time that the people, the Jews, were to be put to death. And it was all because of one man named Haman. He became angry at Mordecai, and so it led him to hate Mordecai, and that hate led to this idea of exterminating the entire Jewish people. And I've said this over the last few weeks, that it must have been somewhat satanically motivated. Again, the idea is if Satan can get rid of the Jewish people, then God cannot bring his Messiah as promised through the Jewish nation, and Satan would win. And so now the law has been written, and as we know, once the law is written in Persia, it cannot be redacted. It cannot be stopped. Haman had lied about the Jews. He had said that they were everywhere throughout the nation, and again, they were not that big of a people. He said that they had their own laws, which is somewhat true, and they didn't follow the king's laws, which really wasn't true, and it caused him to pass this law to get rid of these people. And so now we see that the law has gone public. The law is public to the people, and we see what happens, how the people respond. And it starts with Mordecai. And Mordecai, when he hears this, he mourns. He does something characteristic of what happens when this happens. He puts on sackcloth, and he wears ashes. And it's a sign of inward distress. It's a sign of humiliation. And I think it seems that some reason for him doing it is, a part of it is, this is his fault. If he had just bowed to Haman never would have gotten to this point to pass this law. So it seems that he probably feels some of the pressure, because the people around him had said, just bow to the guy, and he kept refusing to because he was a Jew. And so this is being laid at him, and he's upset, and he feels guilty, and he's mourning the fact that his life is in danger, the Jews, their lives are in danger, and it even means his adopted daughter, his cousin Esther, may be in danger. So we find him putting on sackcloth and ashes and mourning what is happening. And he goes to the king's gate, and we've seen him at this gate before, but there's also some sort of law that seems to be on the books that does not allow him to go beyond that gate in sackcloth. If we turn to the book of Nehemiah, if you were to turn there, we would see that Nehemiah, in the book of Nehemiah, we're told that you're not even allowed to be sad in the king's presence. And yet Nehemiah was, and the king noticed that. And so this morning, this idea of him mourning, he's not allowed to go farther than that. But we see that while he is there, he is very vocal about it. He cries out loud, and it's a bitter moan, a moan of distress, of anguish over what is going to happen. It's a man who is disturbed by what is occurring. His people are in dire straits, and they're looking at the death of an entire nation. And we see he's not the only one that feels that way. As the law went out to the people, as it went out to the provinces, the people, when the Jews heard about it, they did the same thing. Basically, they're being told, you have 11 or 10 or 9 or however long it took, that many months left to live, and then they can kill you. And they felt that they probably would be killed because these people could gain financially. Whatever they're told, whatever when they killed someone, they could loot basically their possessions, and people could make money off of them. And so that is what is happening. The people are mourning and they're fasting and they're desiring to know what is going on. So the people in the whole nation now know what is happening. And it says that they fasted. Now, why would they not eat at this time? Maybe because of nerves about what was going on, but biblical fasting is more than that. One of the things when we began the book of Esther that I said that you'll not find in the book of Esther is you won't find the name of God and you won't find the word prayer. But prayer and fasting are very intertwined when you look into the Scriptures. Whenever you see the word fasting, usually prayer is going with it. And fasting is a time where you basically say that your time and your relationship with God is more important than food. So what really seems to be going on here with the nation of Israel and with Mordecai is that they were not just not eating, they were going to God in prayer about what was happening in their life. They were going to God to say, God, I can only guess, God, save us. That had to be the first thing on their minds. God, save us from this. We don't want to die. We don't want to be killed. Again, the Persians were vicious. We've seen, we talked about the fact that they were the ones that invented crucifixion. They did horrible things to kill people. And so they didn't want to die in these terrible ways. And so they went to prayer. They went to fasting. And they went to God to save them from the fate that was planned out for them by man. As I thought about this week, I thought, many times this really does mirror the Christian life. We only truly go to prayer when times are hard. We may only get really serious about prayer when God is our only option. When things are good, maybe we'll go to prayer for our meal, and maybe before we go to bed, but that's about as far as we go in our prayer life. It's only when things go crazy, go sideways, become difficult, that our prayer life really becomes real to us. The hard times it happens so that we understand that we can fully put our faith in Him or trust in Him. They knew that God was going to do, again, the Jews had this great sense of God's sovereignty, that God is in control because God had told them that, because God had done mighty things. And so they knew that God would do what He was going to do for His glory, and He could save them, or He could save some of them, or just a few of them, from destruction. Because they knew that God would provide, because He had a Messiah promised through the nation. And so they went to God in prayer. I guess one of the questions I have is, why do we wait so long to pray? Why is it that we find ourselves only desiring to actually take it to that level when things are spinning out of control? So many times we always look at those hard times in our life as a negative, but really it's the one time that we grow in our faith is when things are tough, when it doesn't rain like we saw this year, when we lose a loved one, when we lose a job, when we move to a new place, when our kids rebel, when our kids leave the home, when something is not right in our life, then we finally think, oh, I should take this to God. But even if we don't, we can still go to God in those hard times. Let's see what Mordecai does, and let's see Esther's concern. Let's read on, verses 4 to 11. I want us to read about Esther's fear and her concern. Verses 4 to 11. Please stand again as we do this. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai, so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend to her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all king's servants and the king's and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes inside to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out his golden scepter, so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king for these 30 days. Please be seated. Now it seems like those who attended Esther knew Mordecai. And I thought about that a little bit, and I thought, well, why wouldn't they know it? It's something that, when we get together, we talk about family, friends, right? And so here are some people who are in her presence all the time, and we've seen that Esther is this incredible lady that God has gifted with such a character and such wisdom that people were just naturally drawn to her. And so here she is and with these people, and so they go and they tell her that Mordecai is outside the gate, that he's in sackcloth and he's mourning, and Esther seems to be quite concerned with it. Again, Mordecai is her cousin, but also her adopted father. When her parents died, he took her in and raised her. And so she wants to talk to him, so she sends him clothes so that he can dress and enter the king's gates and come and talk to her. That's really what's going on here. She's trying to get to the point where they can have a conversation. But when they tried to give him the clothes, he would not accept them. He would not give up his mourning over what was happening to the Jews. He was not ready to come and talk to Esther yet. There are times in our life when things are so bad that we don't want to talk right away. You ever felt that way? Where you just can't talk about it at the moment. Maybe down the line you'll be able to do that, and that seems to be where Mordecai is. He's so disturbed by what is happening. He's just not ready to give up his mourning and to go talk to her. So he comes back, and she sends another of one of her attendants to Mordecai to find out what's wrong. Okay, you won't come to me and tell me what's going on. I'll send someone to you, and then you can tell him, and he'll tell me, and we'll figure this out. And so he goes to Mordecai, and Mordecai tells him everything. Probably the whole story, Haman would come through, I wouldn't bow down, made him mad, passed this law. He even tells him how much money he gave him. Last week I said the amount of 10,000 talents is like 200 or 350 tons of silver that Haman was going to add to the king's treasury for the killing of the Jews. And this is an incredible amount. And so he tells the whole story to Esther's servants. And he says, now we're all going to die because of this. So he gives the law, he gives the paper to the servant, and he tells him what to do. Tell her, this is what you need to do. Here's what the law says. You need to go into the king, and you need to beg for him to find a way around this, basically. Because again, Persian law cannot be taken away. So help us find a way around this so that we will not lose our life. But there's a problem in this. There's a huge problem in this. Esther says that there's another law that's on the books. And the law is, if you go into the inner court before the king without being called, one thing happens to you. You're killed. And again, like I said, when those guys wanted to kill the king, and Mordecai found out about it, they were hung, which means they were probably impaled on spikes. The Persians did not execute painlessly, let's say. They were pretty cruel about what they did. She said the only thing that can save you is if he tips the golden scepter towards you. Then you're accepted. Then it's okay to go to the king. And so this is what she's saying here, is that this is a huge risk on her life. This could cost her life. This, not just her position as queen, but her very life is at risk. And she says, not only that, I haven't been called before the king in 30 days. In other words, there's no telling when the next time is that I will be called before the king, when I will go to him because he says, bring Esther to me. She has a difficult time, a difficult thing to face. On the one side is the fact that her Mordecai, her adopted father, and her people could be killed. And on the other side is she could die even earlier by going into the king. In our life, I want us to understand there are times we will all face difficulties that may be very difficult. May be hard. Sometimes even a life and death decision may be about. I was thinking about that. Basically when this law went out, the Jews were told you have 11 months to live. Chances are, someone in here is going to hear at some point in their life from the doctor, you have cancer, you have a year left. Talk about a difficult time. There are times that are difficult, other ones that may not be involving life and death. Maybe, like I said earlier, having a job opportunity and having to move away. That's a difficult choice, a difficult thing to do, because you're leaving family and friends and church family for a place you don't know, and you don't know if you're going to be successful. Getting married. I thought, boy, that's one of these things that can be a difficult choice because you don't know if it's going to work and if it's God's plan. It can be frightening. It can be frightening, I think one of the biggest ones in the church today. It can be very frightening to witness to family, friends, neighbors, co-workers, strangers. It can be very frightening for us to do that. There are many things in life that can freeze us from doing God's will. But how do we respond? Right now, as we look at this, Esther seems to be frozen. Two choices. Death or death. Death now or death later. But again, as I've said time and time, as we go through this book of Esther, God is sovereign. God is in control. God knows what he is doing. And God will not be stopped by our refusal. Let's read on. Please stand. Verses 12 to 17. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything Esther had ordered him. said earlier, God will not be stopped by our refusal. The servant brought to Mordecai all that she had said, everything that he had told her about the fact that she hadn't been to the king and going in there is going to cost her life. But Mordecai does not give up. And again, we've seen that Esther is a woman of incredible wisdom. And part of that wisdom is the fact she listens to those who are older than she is. She listens to those who know the situation. She listened to Mordecai and didn't reveal she was a Jew. She listened to the eunuch when she went into the king and took only what he told her to take. She listens, and she takes those things that the people she knows and care about tell her, and she does them. And so he is willing to give her a response to all that she has said. And he responds by telling her that just because she is in the palace as queen doesn't mean she can escape this law. If it slips out that she is a Jew, she is going to die just like the rest of them. There would be no escape because you can't escape the law of the Persians. It wasn't written in the law except for Esther. So she wouldn't escape it. At the very least, she would lose Mordecai and many of her friends and even up to her own life. But what Mordecai says next is extremely profound. And it shows his faith in God. It shows his understanding of the sovereignty that God has. He says, "For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place." Again, he knows God's promises. He knows that a Messiah is coming through the Jews. He knows that God will keep a remnant for himself. He has done it time and time again. And he says, Esther, this is your opportunity. This is your chance. And if you refuse, he will go somewhere else. He's not going to be stopped because you just don't want to do it. He says this. He says that you and your father's house will perish. God will take somebody else and have them do it, but you will perish. And then he says that she may have become queen for just such a time as this. Esther isn't there by accident. Before the foundation of the world, God had planned this. Before the foundation of the world, God knew that Esther would be queen. God knew that he would use her to save the Jews from Haman's evil plan. She's there for this time. Is Esther scared? Oh, yes. Should she be? I don't see why not. Even if she trusts God, there still has to be some kind of fear there. Her life is on the line. And the Persians wouldn't do it kindly. But Mordecai tells her that it doesn't matter. She needs to do it because that is why God placed her there. That is her time. This is her spot of influence at this time of history. For this purpose, to save her people. But Mordecai has so much faith that he tells her if she doesn't do it, God will find someone else. I do find it interesting because there are lots of times in the Bible where God has called someone to something and they ran. We did Jonah, last year maybe about this time, we looked at the life of Jonah and how God told Jonah to go to Nineveh. And Jonah said, man, not me, not going to do it. And how God chased him. And God easily could have used somebody else, but Jonah was the one that God had for that job. Esther is the one that God had for this job. So how does Esther respond to Mordecai? She responds with, okay, I'll do it. But this is what you need to do. sends a message back with her servant that she needs to send, that he needs to gather all the Jews in Susan. All of them in the city, all of them in the citadel, and they need to get together and fast. Again, fast and prayer are tied together. They need to, in other words, they're going to be praying for 3 days, no food, day or night. 3 days of prayer. We don't know exactly what that prayer is going to entail. I am sure part of it is, God, save us. But maybe part of it will be, but if not, God, your will be done. So Esther says, this is what I want you to do. She says, my young women, the women who were with her, they're going to do the same thing. She needs prayer for courage, prayer for her mission, prayer for the king to hear her out. And she says, if I perish, I perish. She understands that if she dies, it's because it's God's will. But she is convinced that she needs to do the right thing no matter what the cost. If it costs her her life, then so be it. She needs to act to save her people. Mordecai did as she asked. And I think he understood that this was going to be a very difficult thing to do. But he knew that God could help her in this time of fear. That she would need courage, she would need grace, she would need all of that to do this difficult job. So he was more than willing to fast and pray for this beloved daughter of his. As Christians, we have all been given jobs that can be very difficult from time to time. The biggest one is we have been given the job of giving the gospel to a lost and dying world that hates God. But just because we're scared of what they might think of us, scared about the questions they may ask, scared about what they might do to us, scared about how they might respond, it does not take away the fact that we are called to give the gospel to a world that is going to hell. We cannot remove ourselves from the mission of Jesus to the church. It can definitely be scary. And yes, it can be difficult. But it doesn't excuse us from doing it. We have been given grace and mercy by Jesus Christ, and we should desperately want to share it with everyone else. I saw a quote the other day from an atheist magician, Penn, I can't remember his last name at the moment, but he said, again, he's an atheist, doesn't believe in God, but he said this, he said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, if you truly believe in a heaven, and you truly believe in a hell, and you truly believe in a God who died and saved you, how much must you hate me to not try to tell me? It can be scary to do those things, but it's our job. We've been given grace and mercy by Jesus Christ, and we should desperately want to share it with everyone else. How can we do this tough job? Well, it begins with prayer. It doesn't matter how old we are, how young we are. It doesn't matter if we're not mobile. We can all pray. We can all pray for each other. We can pray for ourselves. We can pray that God will give us courage and the words to share the gospel. When we neglect what God asks, we miss out on the blessing of watching God work the miracle of salvation in others. There is such an incredible thing. As a pastor, I have seen and I've experienced the fact when I have given the gospel to people and seen them come to faith in Jesus Christ, not because of anything I have done, but because of God's work in them, there is joy. I've said this before. I love it when people come to Christ, and I love doing baptisms. When a person makes a public declaration that I am going to follow Jesus. Part of the job of the church. If we reject our job, then God may use someone else, or even worse, He may chase us until we do it. tell these people of repentance and the gift of God that is eternal life. If you want to do what God calls you to do, then pray. If you want the opportunity to give the gospel, pray. Pray that you would have the opportunity to share with people. I remember one week, this was several years ago, I was realizing as a pastor I'm very stuck in a Christian bubble and I don't always get out into the world very much. And so I thought, I'm going to pray that God gives me the opportunity to share the gospel. And I had 5 people come to church that week who I had never met who wanted to know the gospel. 1 week, because I prayed for them. The opportunity is always there. We just don't open our eyes to it. We need to pray for courage and the right words and pray that God would do the work in the heart of that individual we are witnessing to. So what about us today? We're going to see so much more happen in Esther. Again, seeing God's sovereignty and control in it all. But in the midst of that, there are difficult things in life that we tend to shy away from because of how difficult it may seem. Are there those things in our lives? Again, how are you witnessing? When's the last time you shared your faith? When's the last time you chose to serve in Awana or the nursery or something and take what free time you have in order to serve in something? Because it's hard. There are people in our world who are dying for their faith. Right now in Afghanistan, in Iran, China. So why do we struggle to tell others so much? Why do we struggle to obey God's word? We can get past these things through prayer and obedience. What we do with hard times shows what we believe and who we belong to. What will others say about us in the midst of that? Again, Esther obeyed because she has an entire book written about her. You are not here by accident. You're here for a purpose, for just such a time as this. You are here this morning not by accident, but you are here because God has something for you. You are not in Carrington by an accident, but you are here by His divine will. You do not have the neighbors you have by an accident. You do not have the family you have by an accident. For just a time as this, you exist. What will you do? Where will you go? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, we're so grateful and thankful for this opportunity this morning to know you and what you have for us. So I pray this morning, Lord, that we are not timid, that we learn to pray in the hard times and in the good times. We learn to ask for the opportunity to do the job that you have given us, which is to give the gospel to the nations. Make us